There was a yearly festival in a small village held according to the village's tradition. You could see charming young women walking around with beautiful pearls carefully decorated around their hips and all over their bodies. In the distance, away from everyone else, stood Ogechi, a very beautiful girl who wore an old beige dress that she had received from her mother before she passed away. Ogechi was a young teenager, orphaned of her mother. She lived with her father, stepmother, and half-siblings, Emeka and Kioma. Since Ogechi lost her mother to cancer, her life had become nothing but suffering. Despite her father's presence in the house, she was always unhappy because he never cared for her, even though she had no one else since her mother's death. She had become the servant of her father's new wife, who never missed an opportunity to make her life difficult. "Ogechi!" Mrs. Uzoma shouted angrily. "What are you still doing in the room? Don't you know that you should be helping my daughter prepare for the dance competition?" "Yes, mother," Ogechi replied. Without delay, she quickly headed to her sister's room. As soon as she opened the door, she was shocked to see all the bright pearls on her bed. There were so many that she couldn't even wear them all. A wave of sadness washed over her. She had always asked her father to get her clothes for the festival, but he always said he had no money, and in the end, he bought her nothing. She helped her sister dress and get ready properly. Then she quickly went to her room to get her old clothes to go to the festival. Throughout the journey, Ogechi kept praying in her heart. She was afraid that she might be denied entry to the festival because of her tattered dress. Among all the girls present to participate in the dance competition, she was the only one poorly dressed and unprepared. As she was walking alone to the festival, Mrs. Uzoma asked her to return home to get one of the pearls she had forgotten. She ran as fast as she could so she wouldn't be late because the ceremony was about to start. While she was running, she intensified the prayer in her heart. She returned to the hut, found the pearl, and then headed back to the ceremony. The king then spoke. He welcomed everyone and reminded them that the winner of the competition would have the honor of living in the palace for 3 full months and would receive all the best possible treatments. She would also have the chance to marry the prince. All the participants started getting excited and agitated. Every girl had always dreamed of becoming the prince's wife. So they began preparing to perform the best dance moves possible to win the competition. Before the ceremony started, Ogechi ran to encourage her sister. "Kioma, I know you can do your best. Stay focused and don't forget the dance steps I showed you." Suddenly, Kioma started shouting at her. "Go away! I can manage on my own." Saddened, Ogechi turned away and remained alone under a tree in the distance to watch the dance. She would have loved to be on the dance floor too, but she knew she couldn't join. She just watched alone from her corner, feeling envious and sad. Suddenly, she noticed a presence behind her. She quickly turned around and was surprised to see a handsome man. Startled, she jumped before turning to the stranger to ask what he was doing behind her. The young man smiled. "Who are you?" she asked. "My name is Kwame, and I want to be your friend," the young man replied. This proposition left Ogechi bewildered because her stepmother had already done everything to ensure that no one would want to be her friend. Ogechi, accustomed to solitude, finally decided to accept Kwame's friendship, and the two spent time together watching the competition unfold. They chatted and commented on the girls' performances. Finally, it was Kioma's turn. With her magnificent attire, she stepped into the crowd, and all eyes turned to her. She began dancing, following the steps that Ogechi had taught her. Unfortunately, in the middle of her presentation, she stumbled and fell to the ground. She sprained her ankle and was unable to continue dancing. Her mother came to help her leave the stage. While she was being helped off the stage, Ogechi ran to assist her, while Kwame had a mocking smile on his face. Kioma was eliminated from the competition and was so furious that she began accusing Ogechi of being responsible for her misfortune. Mrs. Uzoma started supporting her daughter, even going as far as calling Ogechi a witch and jealous. "But I didn't do anything. Why are you accusing me?" Ogechi replied. Before she could finish her sentence, a slap echoed across her face. Ogechi's half-brother ran to help her. "Why did you slap her, mother? You know she didn't do anything." Mrs. Uzoma got angry and left with her daughter Shioma. When they were gone, Kwame approached Ogechi and whispered something in her ear. Intrigued, Ogechi asked him what he had said, but Kwame just smiled without giving her an answer. Can you come back tomorrow by the river to see me? I have something important to tell you. Ogechi nodded in agreement, but she felt scared about what might happen if she crossed the threshold of the house. When she returned home, her father was already waiting for her. Mrs. Uzoma had already lied about her. Ogechi's father pounced on her and beat her, leaving many marks on her arms and back. Ogechi went to her room and started crying. She thought about her deceased mother, regretting the protection she used to offer her. The next day, Mrs. Uzoma poured cold water on Ogechi while she was still sleeping. With tears in her eyes, she struggled to get up, still suffering from the wounds and blows she received the previous night. How could your father have such a lazy daughter like you? Mrs. Uzoma asked. Since yesterday, my daughter has been injured in the competition and is writhing in pain, and you still don't know that you should be keeping her company? You're such a failure. Before leaving the room, she ordered her to cook for the whole family. When the young girl joined the backyard to cook, she found her brother Amika already breaking firewood for her. When he saw Ogechi approaching, he noticed her difficulty in walking. He approached her and asked, "Why are you walking like that? What happened to you?" Ogechi tried to divert his attention from the subject, but he was not convinced. "Well, if you don't tell me what happened to you, I will go and ask your father." "No, please don't do that. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Yesterday, during the competition, a young man came up to me and asked to be my friend." Emeka did not expect this kind of revelation, and he quickly forgot the question he had asked Ogechi. He knew that since her mother died, she had always been alone and had no friends. He was very happy for her. He helped her cook so she wouldn't be late and provoke Mrs. Uzoma's anger again. They stayed in the kitchen, chatting and cooking together. After finishing all her tasks, Ogechi got ready as planned, took a basin, and set off for the river. She was supposed to meet Kwame. After a few minutes of walking, she finally found him at the place he had indicated. Ogechi was happy to see her friend, but was also very eager to learn more about him. Since she had been in the village, she had never noticed him and decided to ask him the question. "How is it that you're from this village and I've never met you before?" Kwame smiled and reassured her not to worry. "With time, you will learn more about me." "Well, now, can you tell me why you wanted to see me today?" With a serious expression, Kwame replied that he wanted to teach her how to dance as well, so that she could prepare for the upcoming village competitions and also for what would soon happen. "What do you mean by what will soon happen?" Kwame started smiling without giving her an answer. After a few minutes of chatting, he helped her fetch water from the river. Before parting, he gave her some advice and asked her to always behave well and continue to be respectful. Ogechi found her friend's behavior very strange, but she didn't pay much attention to it. She returned home and started working again to prepare lunch. She went into the hut to get some salt when she suddenly noticed that she no longer had any wounds on her arms. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw that the wounds on her body and back had also disappeared. She was completely confused. Suddenly, her stepmother called her. She quickly changed into a long-sleeved outfit so as not to draw Mrs. Uzoma's attention to her disappeared injuries. Mrs. Uzoma handed her some yams and asked her to prepare them for her and her children. "I didn't say you would eat the yams with us. If you're hungry, you can make some soup," Ogechi responded politely before leaving. She went to the kitchen. While Mrs. Uzoma's best friend, who was a traditional healer, was treating Kiyoma's injury, Mrs. Uzoma entered the room. Her face was struck by a wave of worry, which caught her best friend's attention. "What's wrong, Uzoma?" she asked. Lost in thought, she finally replied, "I saw something earlier that shocked me. I've always told you that this girl is not normal, that she is a witch. You never believed me. This morning while I was reprimanding her, I noticed that she no longer had any traces of the injuries she had on her. I checked thoroughly, but I saw nothing." Her friend was shocked by her statement. "But how is that possible? Are you sure you saw correctly?" her friend asked. "Of course, that's why I'm as shocked as you are." Meanwhile, Ogechi had finished preparing the meal. She made sure to do everything correctly as her stepmother had instructed. She took some water in a glass and headed to Kiyoma's room to give it to her. When Kiyoma took the water from her hands, she suddenly threw it. Ogechi turned to her and asked what was wrong. Kiyoma replied, "You're nothing but a witch. You planned all of this. It's your fault that I'm now bedridden and unable to walk properly on both legs." You did everything to make sure I lost the competition. Ogechi stood there stunned, unable to say a word. She quietly turned away without saying anything, remembering everything Kwame had told her. She went to her room and began to cry. After many hours, she finally calmed down. She ate her soup and started singing joyfully as if nothing had happened. While she was singing, her brother Amika entered the room, alerted by her voice. I see you're in a good mood today. I was drawn by your singing, and I'm very happy to see you so cheerful. She smiled and served him his food. Emeka invited her to eat with him, and she took the opportunity to eat as well. He asked her how her day had gone. Well, my day went well, she replied. Kwame is very nice, and he taught me many things. But what surprised me the most is that when I got home, I no longer saw any injuries on me. All my wounds had disappeared. Emeka thought it was a joke, but when he looked at Ogechi's hands, he realized she was telling the truth. With a big smile on his face, Emeka replied, That shouldn't worry you, Ogechi. You should be happy instead. I'm very glad you met someone like that. I'm sure he's not just an ordinary human as you think. You just need to be careful with him. After the meal, Emeka left, and so did Ogechi, going to their respective rooms. Ogechi lay down, very tired. While she was sleeping, she had a strange dream. In her dream, she was being chased by masked people who had whips and sticks. Exhausted, she eventually collapsed. As they gathered around her to whip her, she suddenly woke up from her dream. Upon waking, she felt as if there were two people beside her, but she couldn't identify them. After that nightmare, Ogechi had difficulty falling asleep. She stayed awake in her bed until the early morning. Very early, she got up, went to the kitchen to start her domestic chores. She saw Mrs. Uzoma coming out of the backyard, holding a white bottle in her hands. She hid to avoid encountering her first thing in the morning. Mrs. Uzoma went to the threshold of Ogechi's room, glanced inside, and murmured some things before leaving. Ogechi remained stunned for a moment, not understanding what she had gone to do in her room, but then she quickly resumed her work. She made sure to do everything properly, cleaned all the dirty objects, and cooked before the others woke up. She then went into the forest to gather wood. While she was gathering, she felt like someone was with her. She suddenly stopped and shouted, Is there someone? Come out of hiding! She paused for a moment to listen, but no one answered. She continued gathering her bundles of wood. After collecting a lot of wood, she left the forest. She decided to rest for a while before heading back. She often sat near a stream not far from the forest where she would go to clear her mind. She went there, placed the wood she had gathered down, and stepped into the water. It was a quiet place she had discovered a long time ago, where there was never anyone. She began to sing and dance joyfully in the water. Suddenly, she heard someone calling her name. She turned around and saw Kwame. He asked her to let him show her how to dance, claiming he was a great dancer. Ogechi was surprised to see him there. She asked him how he knew she was there. He replied that he had followed her while she was walking in the forest. Ogechi wasn't convinced by his answer, but she decided to drop the conversation. She asked him how he planned to teach her to dance. She teased him, convinced that he didn't know how to dance as he claimed. Suddenly, Kwame stepped out of the water and started dancing. She watched him, stunned. She had never imagined that he could dance so well. She was amazed by the dance moves he was making. Ogechi had never seen anyone dance so well. She just stood there watching him as if she had never met him in her life. When he finished, she asked him how he learned to dance so well and who taught him. Ogechi had inherited this talent from her mother, but she had never seen anyone dance better than her. Kwame laughed, offering to teach her if she wanted. Soon they stood side by side and began dancing and learning. Ogechi was dazzled by his dancing skills and couldn't wait to learn more about dancing. They continued learning together, and Kwame showed her how to master a choreography. She learned new things about him and was particularly marked by the moment she shared with her friend. After a long time of chatting and learning, Ogechi decided to go home as it was already night. Kwame turned to her and asked, I want you to assure me that our meetings and conversations will remain private and that you won't tell anyone about the dance I taught you. Ogechi promised not to tell anyone. I also want you to place a broom on your door every night before you sleep and make sure you only leave the house the next morning. All of this seemed strange to the young girl. She wanted to ask him why he was telling her such things, But as soon as she opened her mouth, she realized he was no longer there. She wondered who he could be to do such strange things. She went home, and upon arriving, she saw her father and stepmother in the living room, deep in conversation. She was very hungry, so she ignored them and went to the kitchen to see if there was anything to eat. But the pot was empty. She went back to the living room, intending to ask Mrs. Uzoma if she had saved any food for her. As she approached the living room, she heard her father saying that she would be given in marriage and that in 2 weeks she had to leave the house to join her husband. She couldn't believe her ears. She was unable to move a single step and began to tremble with fear when suddenly Mrs. Uzoma appeared in front of her. She patted her on the shoulder and said, "You thought you could play your witchcraft tricks on us all your life? Soon you'll leave and we'll have peace in this house." Ogechi knelt beside her father, her face filled with tears. "Please don't do this to me. Tell me if I've done something wrong. Why do you hate me so much?" Her father pushed her away and told her not to interfere with his words and that his decision was already made. As Ogechi knelt there, crying as she had never cried before, her father added, "In 2 weeks, you'll go join your husband. Prepare yourself accordingly because he is not from this village." After receiving this shocking news, Ogechi had no one on her side. She ran to her mother's grave and began to scream and cry. She told all her sorrows as if her mother were there, and after crying so much that she had no more tears, she decided to go home before provoking Mrs. Uzoma's anger again. She got up, and suddenly she saw on the ground the pearl her mother had given her before she died. She blinked to make sure it was really the same one because she also had it at home in her bag. She wondered how it was possible. She put it in her pocket and left. When she returned to the kitchen to see if there was anything to eat, the pots were still empty. She walked out sadly to go to bed when suddenly she met her brother, who was holding food and water in his hand. He handed her the food. "Don't worry too much, Ogechi. I'll always be on your side, and I'll try to persuade Papa not to send you away for marriage. You're still very young, and you shouldn't have to go through all this." Ogechi didn't know how to thank him. He had always been there for her, and she was grateful. She quickly ate the meal, afraid that Mrs. Uzoma might catch her, and then she went into her room to sleep. Before falling asleep, she remembered what Kwame had told her. She quickly got up and went to place the broom on the door. Late in the night, Ogechi was awakened by voices outside. She looked through a hole in the door and saw Mrs. Uzoma and her friend dressed in black and red, standing near her door and trying to get in, but in vain. They were murmuring some words that Ogechi couldn't understand. She was so scared that she lay back on her bed, clutching her blanket tightly. After long hours, she no longer heard the voices, and when she looked through the door again, they were gone. She knelt down and thanked God for helping her get through it, and especially for bringing Kwame into her life. The next morning, she woke up, stepped out of her room, and found Mrs. Uzoma standing in front of her door, staring at her with contempt. She went to greet her and pretended not to know anything about what had happened during the night. As usual, she headed to the kitchen to do her daily chores. After doing the laundry and dishes, she began peeling the cassava she planned to cook. While cutting the cassava, she was lost in thought, remembering the scene that had occurred during the night, and a shiver ran down her spine. She decided to tell Kwame about her ordeal when she went to gather wood in the bush. Suddenly, Mrs. Uzoma appeared. "What have you been doing? You're not done yet? I want you to take these leaves to my friend, Mrs. Chikondi." "I haven't finished my chores, Mother. I'll go after I'm done cooking." "No, right now," retorted Mrs. Uzoma. "Leave everything and go do what I asked. You will give it to her and make sure no one knows what's inside." Ogechi got up and started on her way. As she slowly walked along the road, she had a bad feeling. She prayed fervently in her heart that her friend Kwame would come because she felt a great sense of security with him. She looked at the bag Mrs. Uzoma had given her, wondering what it could contain and why she had given her such strict instructions. Suddenly, Kwame appeared in front of her, out of nowhere. She almost fell because she didn't expect to see him, especially not like that. She crouched down, clutching her chest after the fright she had just experienced. Her friend laughed and asked her to get up, promising to be more careful next time. Kwame's gaze immediately turned to the bag Ogechi was holding. "Where are you going like this, Ogechi? What are you doing with that bag in your hands?" Ogechi replied that Mrs. Uzoma had given it to her and asked her to deliver it to her friend. Kwame asked her to give him the bag. The young girl refused because Mrs. Uzoma had been clear in her instructions. She had asked her to keep it to herself and not let anyone touch it. Kwame said he just wanted to hold it while she helped him pick some fruits. She complied and handed him the bag. She then accompanied him into the bush and helped him pick the fruits. After they finished picking the mangoes, Kwame returned the bag to her. After Ogechi took it back, her friend turned to her and said, "You don't have to worry. You can go ahead peacefully." Ogechi thanked him and told him about what she had experienced the previous night. Kwame smiled and told Ogechi that she should continue to do what he had recommended. "You must always keep the broom on your door and make sure not to go out before dawn." Ogechi asked him, "Why are you so mysterious?" He laughed again. "You will know me better over time." After a few more conversations, Kwame left. Ogechi stood for a moment, watching him walk away until he disappeared completely. She resumed her journey with a much calmer heart. She quickly headed to Mrs. Chikandi's house and delivered the package. But she noticed something. The package had slightly changed and was no longer exactly the same. She was sure Kwame had done something. She had many questions. She turned to go home, praying that Mrs. Uzoma wouldn't suspect anything. When she arrived, she went to her room to tell her that she had completed her task and delivered the package. When she reached the door, she overheard a conversation between Mrs. Uzoma and her daughter Kyoma. "I've already sent the potion to Mrs. Chikandi. Now Ogechi will be even more severely mistreated by her father. I think she must still be on her way right now. She doesn't know what's coming." She started laughing wickedly with her daughter. Ogechi was stunned. She wondered why Mrs. Uzoma hated her so much. She had always done everything and always respected her requests. She realized that her father's behavior was not his fault, and that all this time he had been under the influence of a bad spell cast by Mrs. Uzoma. She began to cry. She didn't know what to do anymore. She wondered what she could do to free her father from Mrs. Uzoma's grip. She knew she had to act quickly before it was too late. She had no solution, but suddenly she remembered her friend Kwame. She went to see Mrs. Uzoma to ask what she wanted for the meal. When she entered, she startled her. "How long have you been here?" asked Mrs. Uzoma. "I just arrived," Ogechi replied. "I just wanted to know what you would like to eat before I go to the stream to fetch water." Mrs. Uzoma asked her to prepare rice, still looking at her suspiciously. She handed her the necessary ingredients to cook the meal. Ogechi made sure to prepare the meal carefully. As soon as she finished, she was eager to see her friend to ask if he could do something to help her free her father from their schemes. She took a bucket of water and left the house. She headed to their meeting point and began waiting for him. A few minutes later, Kwame appeared out of nowhere. She was very happy to see him. Kwame noticed the impatience in her eyes. He asked her why she wanted to see him. Ogechi told Kwame the whole story. She told him how she had overheard her stepmother and half-sister talking about the spells they had cast on her father. She explained that all of her father's decisions and the violence against her weren't his own doing. She then asked him to help open her father's eyes. Kwame told her not to worry. He asked her not to be afraid and said he would help her at the right time. Ogechi was eager for an immediate answer, hoping to finally have her father on her side. She asked why he didn't want to help her right away. Kwame asked her to be patient and said things would get better. He asked her to take some salt water and sprinkle it where the potion had been buried. Ogechi didn't know much about it. She didn't know where the potion had been buried. Kwame reassured her and said she would know at the right time. "When you get home, you'll see a piece of palm leaf to guide you and assure you it's the right spot. After that, you'll see that your father will finally be on your side and will no longer mistreat you." After their conversation, Ogechi went to fetch water from the river, and Kwame continued on his way. When Ogechi returned to the village, the king had gathered all the villagers to make an announcement. He publicly announced that another competition would be organized for all the young girls in the village, and that following this grand competition, the prince would choose his future wife. Ogechi was overjoyed. She was determined to participate. She entered her room joyfully when Mrs. Uzoma called her. "Ogechi, I want you to teach Kyoma to dance again for the competition." "Mother, I want to participate too. The king said everyone can participate." Before she could finish her sentence, A slap rang out on her face. Who do you think you're talking to, you vile girl? Do you really think you're capable of being in the same competition as my daughter? You have no talent and no grace in your movements. This is not something for your social class. She insulted her and called her all sorts of names. Meanwhile, her father was also in the living room watching the entire scene. He didn't react and let Mrs. Uzoma insult his daughter. Ogechi went to her room in tears. She wondered how she could participate in the competition. She was lost in thought when she heard noises coming from the courtyard. She looked through the crack in the door and saw her sister Kyoma and two other girls, who were her friends, talking about the competition. She went to get a glass of water, and when she returned, she heard the girls saying that she was the only young girl who never participated in the village competitions. They laughed together and mocked her, pointing at her. Ogechi turned around with a determined look and replied, "We'll see about that. No one can go against the will of the gods." She turned around, surprised by what she had just said. She didn't even know when those words had come out of her mouth. The girls looked at her and all started laughing. Ogechi hurried back to her room. She sat on her bed and began to think. Many questions troubled her mind. At night, while everyone was sleeping, she got up from her bed. She took the glass of water she had taken from the kitchen and added a bit of kitchen salt as Kwame had recommended. She quietly left her room and went behind her hut. She began looking for the spot, and her gaze fell on a palm leaf as Kwame had indicated. She poured the salt water on the spot and quietly returned to her room. She placed the broom in front of her door again as Kwame had asked and went to bed. The next morning, she was still sleeping when she heard someone banging on the door. She lazily got up and opened the door. It was Mrs. Uzoma. She greeted her politely. "Good morning, Mother." "The day can't be good," she replied angrily. "When I gave you the package the other day, who touched it?" "No one, Mother," Ogechi replied. "I gave it to Mrs. Chikondi just as you asked." With an angry face, she said, "You think I'm a fool, don't you? You think I'm stupid? You'll see what I'm made of. Since you want to push me to the limit, you'll see." She stormed off in anger. When Mrs. Uzoma left, Ogechi went to the hut to start her daily tasks. She saw her father in the backyard and greeted him. "Good morning, Dad." "Yes, my daughter. How are you?" her father replied. Ogechi couldn't believe her ears. Since her mother's death, her father had never spoken to her like that. "I'm fine, Dad," she replied joyfully. "Bring me some water to drink, my daughter," her father added. Emeka was witnessing the scene and was very happy that their father was speaking so joyfully to Ogechi. As Ogechi was about to hand the cup of water to her father, Mrs. Agnes suddenly appeared and snatched it violently from her. "You idiot! What are you doing with this cup? Are you trying to kill my husband?" She started yelling at her. "Who asked you to bring him water? We don't need your help. Don't think that just because you killed your mother, you can also easily kill my husband. I won't allow that as long as I'm alive." She went towards her husband, placed her hand on his head and whispered something, and he immediately became strange again. As soon as he saw Ogechi near his room, he began scolding her and asked why she was there. The young girl explained that he was the one who had asked for water, but without waiting, he began beating her severely. Emeka was nearby. He ran to try to stop his father, but he wouldn't listen and continued beating Ogechi. After he was done, he told her never to set foot near his room again if she didn't want any trouble with him. Ogechi went to her room crying. Emeka also entered the room to console her. He gave her water so she could wash her face. While she was doing that, Mrs. Uzoma entered the room. She told Emeka that his father needed him. As soon as Emeka left, Mrs. Uzoma approached Ogechi and began talking to her. "Where did you come from, old witch? You think you're above everyone, using magical powers to attack me? Know that you'll never be able to harm us. Even if you manage to harm my friend Mrs. Chikondi, you'll never get away with it with me. Know that if you plot something against me, you'll be the first to die." Ogechi didn't understand anything from this shocking revelation. She took her pearl, the one her mother had given her, and headed to the river to meet her friend and ask him some questions. She sat by the river and began to grow impatient. She was so troubled that she couldn't even stay still. After a few minutes that felt like long hours, Kwame finally arrived. He was holding a small bag in his hand. He came up to Ogechi and told her that he knew everything that was bothering her. "I know you're very worried and want answers, but don't be afraid. Just know that the gods are on your side and nothing will happen to you. Ogechi wasn't satisfied. She wanted explanations. Please, tell me why they are accusing me. Today my father was kind to me and even called me his daughter. Then he asked me to get him water, and when I brought it to him, Mrs. Uzoma did something to him and he became very angry with me, Ogechi recounted. Kwame saw the worry in her eyes, so he decided to give her a bit more explanation. They both sat down. The other day when you were bringing a package to Mrs. Chikondi, it was a curse meant for you. Ogechi screamed. What? Yes, her friend replied. If you had delivered it to her intact as she asked, you would have been hers forever, whether you wanted it or not. Ogechi couldn't believe her ears. Her friend continued. That's why I asked you to pick some fruits for me so that I could swap it. As soon as you finished picking the fruits, it wasn't the same thing I handed back to you. I changed the contents to spare you from that curse. What you gave her is the reason for what is happening to her now. She will never be able to attack you again because she no longer has any witchcraft. Ogechi tried to ask another question when he stopped her. No, no more questions today. But I have some bad news to tell you, added Ogechi. I think I won't be able to participate in the competition. My father doesn't want to hear anything from me, and Mrs. Uzoma will never let me go. She says I don't deserve to be in the same competition as her daughter. You don't have to worry about that. Stay calm and let God take care of things. He handed Ogechi the bag he had been holding. Inside the bag were beautiful, carefully wrapped jewels that shone brightly. Kwame asked her to keep them safe. Ogechi was very happy. She had never had such beautiful jewelry in her life. She took out the pearl her mother had given her and showed it to Kwame. He asked her to keep it safe, along with the jewels he had brought her. He reminded her to hide them and not let anyone take them. Ogechi promised to take care of them, but she didn't want to let him go before asking him the question that was still bothering her. She asked him what she should do about her father. Kwame told her to continue following all his instructions, to pour salted water every day on the spot he had indicated, and to always place the broom in front of the door before going to sleep. He also advised her not to eat the meals prepared by her stepmother. She promised to do her best. Then he left. Ogechi also set out to return home. When she arrived home, her father and Uzoma had already packed all her belongings and were waiting to send her off for marriage. Ogechi, go wash up and dress to go to your husband. No, father, I don't want to. I don't want to marry someone I don't know. Please, Dad, don't do this to me. You wouldn't dare do this if my mother were alive. Before she could finish her sentence, a slap echoed across her face. I'd rather die than go with you to where you've sold me, Ogechi added, crying. She ran out of the house in tears. Her father began to chase her. The continuation and conclusion of this story are already available and will be published as soon as we reach 5,000 likes on this video. Like the video to quickly reach the goal and subscribe so you don't miss when the next part is posted.